welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I was just cutting up some cardboard because the bin that I want to check in on today is built largely out of little pieces of cardboard approximately this size. And those layers of cardboard, as some might suggest, resemble a stack of lasagna noodles layered up one on top of each other with I guess different things layered in between. If you were making actual lasagna, I guess the stuff that goes in between the layers of pasta are things like tomato sauce and cheese and stuff like that. But when you do one of these so-called lasagna style feedings like I'm doing here in this worm bin right here, you're substituting the pasta with layers of cardboard or paper or something along those lines, and the layers are separating not cheese and tomato sauce, but rather, you know, whatever it is that the worms are being fed that day. In this case, stuff that they're slated to get are a bunch of stuff that they should really enjoy, such as a banana peel right here and a whole bunch of cantaloupe melon, some of it even having a good amount of the actual fruit on it besides the skin or the rind or whatever it's called on a cantaloupe melon. And the other thing that a lot of my worm feedings include is coffee. In this case, I've got enough here for two. And you know, in the past, I've actually used these coffee filters as a layer there in my lasagna layers. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go ahead and add this much extra cardboard. I think in the past we've gone so far as to supplement the existing layers with maybe one fresh piece of cardboard. And that newest piece of cardboard is now not even so new. I think it's actually been sitting here in the bin for a couple of feedings. We've actually talked about putting it to some better use down within the lasagna layers rather than just having it sit out on top as a sort of lid for the whole stack. And since we've got some nice replacement pieces of cardboard that we could use to swap that out, I think today we'll actually upgrade the function of that piece of cardboard that's sitting out on top and actually bring it down lower where it might get a little bit more attention. So here the first thing I'm seeing is the cardboard, but stuck to the newspaper is a coffee filter. Yet another coffee filter. And that was the one weird thing about this last feeding, was that I think I had a lot of stuff that represents the pasta noodle layers in lasagna. So I had a good amount of paper and cardboard and various stuff like that, but towards the end I had no more kitchen scraps to put in between the layers. So if this counts as a layer, then there's nothing in between that and the next layer, the cardboard. And then if memory serves me correctly, then even one more layer down after the cardboard, we're going to find a sheet of newspaper with nothing in between the newspaper and the cardboard. So we did sort of peter out towards the end. I had a little bit more layers than stuff to squeeze between the layers. Just looking at some of this weird stuff here, I wonder what that is. You know what I think that is? That's probably just the tracks. It almost looks like little veins running through a leaf or something, or through, you know, blood vessels or something. But I believe that that's just a little bit of a track showing where these worms that are right beneath it have been squirming, coming and going. It's just kind of interesting the way they leave behind a little trail of their mucus or whatever it is on the cardboard that they're bumping into that's right above them. I wonder how many worms have actually occupied the layers in between this cardboard. I was watching the check-in on another lasagna layered feeding scenario in another lasagna style bin on another channel, and over there, when those layers were peeled apart, the worms had moved in and taken over in between those layers. So you can see I've got a good amount of material that I could sandwich in between the layers of our lasagna when we rebuild it. So we'll see about not leaving out any food in between the lasagna layers, but sometimes I just don't calculate the the ingredients correctly so that I don't end up with the screwed up dish at the end. Probably the reason I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen cooking either. Alright, so now we're getting down to where some of the food that they got last time is showing up. I've got to admit, I'm a little bit surprised because, you know, when I put stuff into the bins, such as, I think this right here and this right here are probably chunks of cabbage, which I kind of figured would be totally gone by now. Stuff like this, the asparagus, is extremely fibrous. You know, if you've ever eaten asparagus, you'll know. But if you haven't, you could see it right here. Extremely fibrous material, which kind of like a banana peel. Seems to take a little while to get broken down. I guess that's a little bit tougher than the surrounding vegetable matter. So in time, this stuff will all get broken down, but it's still an early stage. It's been 9 days since we last checked in on this bin. That's why I thought it would be appropriate to come in and see if they need any food. And you know, usually in my wormery, even if I encounter leftovers of a previous feeding, I'll typically stick to my game plan to feed. So I believe that we'll probably just recycle a lot of these larger bits of uneaten food from the previous feeding or from previous feedings. Ooh, look at the juice coming out of it. Then I think we'll just incorporate these in with the new foods, or maybe even make a special layer out of the older foods. The asparagus is a little bit pungent, so sometimes when the food just hasn't had a chance to really get actively broken down in the worm bin, it could start to decompose a little bit and start to give off a little bit of its nasty odors. But typically you don't really sense a lot of odor in a worm bin. It's almost like odor free, other than maybe the scent of maybe what you would experience out in the forest or the forest floor. So yeah, there's a little bit of funkiness going on here, suggesting that the foods that they got are not actually being broken down in the conventional way. They're kind of rotting in a way. Luckily, it's not terrible, you know. It's just a little bit stinky, but I got a feeling that that isn't going to last. Usually that doesn't last too long. It might be there, you know, during your first check-in, but the next time you come in, chances are you're not going to experience a whole lot of that. And I guess at this point, some of the layers that we put down, I think were just a collection of little bits of stuff that were collected together and scattered down into sort of a bottom layer. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, these little chunks of paper and cardboard, fragments of a larger full sheet of something before it got tattered up. So yeah, this asparagus can definitely use a little bit more work. A lot more work. There's a good amount of food here. It almost makes me question whether I should add food or not. It just seems completely unnecessary as I really start to see how much leftover food there is in here. I'm starting to wonder if we'd be better off simply withholding the fresh food and perhaps at least reinforce the bedding supply in the system by maybe reconstructing the layers with the existing food and incorporating a little bit of fresh bedding in the form of lasagna layers. So it would be a shame to have gone this far in turning up the contents of the bin and not doing anything constructive. I mean, one way or another, I believe we would put things back together to a certain degree in a lasagna-like fashion. Even though I think, you know, in past check-ins I've hinted at the fact that maybe it's time to bring this lasagna-style feeding to an end, partially because I am sort of running out of room in which I can do this sort of significant excavation. I need somewhere to put the stuff I'm digging out while I give myself the room to do the rebuild or reconstruction of the layers. So I think you do eventually run out of space in which you can do this sort of stuff. But while it's happening, it's a little bit fun to kind of have a little twist to how you're feeding, as opposed to just dumping in stuff. You're almost like deliberately building something to, I don't know, possibly enhance the life of the creatures in the system. Perhaps that opportunity to squirm around in between things, or perhaps even just the experience of kind of getting cornered into something in between a couple layers, for example, and not being able to just go anywhere. Perhaps heightens the experience that the worms have in their worm bins. I really don't know what it's like to be a worm, but sometimes I superimpose human thinking onto the worms, you know. I think that they're a significantly different type of a being than we are. So to, you know, think that they've got the needs or wants of a human, it's not wise, although I think a lot of people do it. You know, when you're caring for an animal, you start to sense that it might have some form of a, I don't know, characteristics of a human, feelings and stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't say that animals don't have feelings, because clearly some of the more intellectual ones show clear signs of there being, you know, feelings. But, you know, makes you wonder. Creature as simple as a worm, does it ever get that far? Or is its brain just kind of wired for the simple things, you know? Eating, finding a space where you're comfortable, and locomotion, being able to get away from bad stuff and get over to good stuff, stuff like that, you know? I mean, I don't know how big the brain of a worm is, but I would have to imagine, just based on its size, that it's a little bit limited. So all these little worms continuing to just squirm around within this material makes my little, I don't know, this pit that I dug makes it a little bit fragile, you know. So before it starts to collapse in on itself, I think we might as well just get started right away with the reconstruction of these layers, right? Why leave these little guys out here in the air and the bright lights if we can reset their environment quickly and get them back into a comfortable space. So, I believe that a good thing to begin with is some of my pre-made bedding. We don't need a lot because there's good amounts of bedding in here. But, you know, these being African night crawlers, they do tend to enjoy their bedding, so it's probably a good ingredient to be pretty generous with. And don't forget, every piece of paper, every piece of cardboard, it's all carbon-based stuff, all that amounts to not only a carbon-based food source, but also as their bedding. But you know what? I almost forgot. Let me make mention of what happened here. You know, there was this idea of trying to preserve the castings left behind by the worms that inhabit this system and hang on to their castings to see if they left behind any cocoons that might hatch. And that system actually ran for 84 days in that mode of trying to collect up baby worms, and it just seemed to me like, unlike my other systems where I was starting to see some signs of baby worms in much less time, in the so-called cocoon nursery that I created out of the castings and cocoons left behind by these worms 87 days ago when this bin was originated, I was trying to bait worms out of the material, and I would say that these couple worms that are actually in this probably came out of this system and, you know, crawled into this little scrap of recycled materials that I took out of the cocoon nursery when I decommissioned it. So this is just another little collection of paper and bedding and a little bit of food scrap that I'd been using in that other system, which I officially have decommissioned at this point, in case you were wondering. For a while there, we were checking in on the cocoon nursery associated to this system, and unfortunately in that case it seemed like we weren't really very successful. Although usually I have good luck in the cocoon nurseries, for whatever reason I did not have much luck in this case. But that could be attestable possibly to the fact that these are African night crawlers, a worm that originates from a tropical environment where they're accustomed to much warmer temperatures. And now that it's winter time, my basement does tend to cool off a bit, which could be potentially, I don't know, maybe reducing the activity of African night crawlers. So maybe that's part of the reason we're seeing some leftovers down here, but maybe that's the reason we also didn't see a lot of results in their cocoon nursery. I've actually decided I'm going to hang on to those castings that these little guys produced, with the assumption that there's still cocoons in that stuff that have yet to hatch, and then maybe at some point in the near future, when conditions become more favorable, those cocoons will sense the, I don't know, increase in humidity, the extra warmth, whatever it is that might get those cocoons to kick back to life and proceed with the development and hatching. Because I've got no use for those castings now anyway. I'm not planting anything. So those castings will sit by in one of my storage bins for a while, and will get a chance at some point in the future to see what became of it, but at this point I figured I would mention it because for a while we were checking in on both systems at the same time, but since it's now been terminated, I figured let everyone know, we could take it off our radar, and I've already marked it off in my tracking spreadsheet as abandoned. Alright, we've reused all the chunks of asparagus. All of them have been opened up now too, exposing their inside, hopefully exposing them to extra worm traffic too as a result. So that piece of paper we placed down there was one of the top layers. It was the piece of newspaper we found right beneath the cardboard. But I keep coming back here to try to reuse some of these old bits. This was the that first piece of paper we found when we removed the top covering. It was stuck to the top covering, and like I've done in the past, I think it's time to give this material a more significant mission. So rather than sitting out on top where there's very little traffic, it's going down into a lower level now where it'll hopefully see a lot more action than it's seen in the past. It's so weird when you kind of see little bits of coffee still stuck to a filter after who knows how long. You would think that the worms would come along and nibble it off, but there again, that piece of paper having been up high at an upper level, it might not have received as much worm traffic as it's going to get now that it's down low. And you know, now that we're putting in some of the fresh food that we bought, I'm glad that I've allowed this stuff to sit out and thaw a little bit. You know, usually the like, you know, I bring down the food and it's hard as a rock. I could break it, but you can see that this stuff has had a chance to thaw out now and soften up a little bit, and maybe not be quite as shocking if it comes in contact with any worms. But I'm still going to be careful. Try not to expose any of our poor little worms to hunks of frozen material. So now, similar to what we did with the coffee filter and the newspaper that's down low, I believe time has come to give this piece of cardboard a really significant role, which is pretty much living in the middle layer of our lasagna stack. So I got a feeling by being down here it's not going to last much longer, but after a couple feedings of us bumping in on this thing and, you know, finding it pretty much intact still, I've got a feeling that it's not going to be that way for very long. I think pretty soon it's going to start looking more like this. Well, that's what I'm hoping for, but then again, like I said earlier, I think there could be a little bit of a slowdown going on inside of my worm bins due to the cold. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we came back in here and we would still find leftovers and perhaps further signs of further slowdown. I don't expect that it's going to get much cooler than it is now, but the fact that it's gone from a persistent 70 or so degrees Fahrenheit down here on a regular basis to being about 10 degrees cooler now, you know, just comparing warmer months to what's going on now, it's different, you know. I wear my basement sweater, the one that I don't worry about getting all dirty and everything, because, you know, coming down here it is a little bit chilly, and I feel for the worms. Every time I come down here I could feel a little bit of a chill in the air, and I just have to keep reminding myself, it's like, hey, these worms down here in the basement, they got it made, you know. If you think about the worms that live outside in the outdoor compost barrel or in the outside worm bag, those are just a couple of my other systems that I manage and share videos about. You know, if you think about what those little guys out there must be experiencing, especially the type of temperatures we're expecting tonight and tomorrow night, it's going to be extremely frigid. So I've always had good luck running the worm bins outside. They're tough little critters, and I think we don't give them enough credit in that vein. You know what? Another thing that I like to bring in sometimes when I'm feeding my worms is a little bit of a food supplement. It's not so much the stuff that they draw nourishment from. It's more about kind of an aid to their digestion, since they're a creature, sort of like a bird that uses a gizzard to break down its food, as opposed to like us, we use acid in our stomach to break the foods down. They need something else in there, because it's like muscular activity as well as coarse materials like this grit, pulverized eggshell in my case, that enables the worms to break down the foods that they're eating. So let's see, I'm trying to remind myself what it was that we had stacked up here on the edges. I think it was all just stuff out of the lasagna layers and nothing that we could really make use of as far as recycled stuff in terms of building layers. I mean, last time I did collect up a good amount of stuff that looked sort of like this. And I tried to, supplement the layers a little bit with it, but there's really not a whole lot of that going on here. I did try to stack up a couple of them, but it seemed to me like I was finding so few of them that it didn't really make a lot of sense to bother with it. So why don't we use this here? Another good lasagna layer. Perhaps not as impressive as a piece of cardboard, but all the same, just some sort of a divider between the layers of food that they're getting. And here's some more food, but I think this is the last of the food. Yeah, it's all I've got left for them. We've used all the recycled asparagus chunks that we located when we first came in here. All the melon rind has gone in. So at this point, in goes the coffee. Something about coffee, though, I don't know why. I always get this sense when I put coffee into the worm bins that it's kind of like an ingredient that the worms don't take a shine to all on its own. So mixing it with something, I think, helps. And in a lot of cases, that's where my pre-made bedding comes into play again. Just seems to me, I don't know why, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the coffee combined with some bedding could make it into a somewhat more appealing place for the worms to come hang out. And since all that stuff that was down low had a good amount of moisture content to its own, but this coffee combined with this, dampened paper and cardboard shreddings doesn't really have a great deal of moisture. I think I'm going to supplement it with my spray bottle here, just so that this layer doesn't suddenly turn into sort of a sponge that absorbs all the moisture from the surrounding areas into itself. But I'm not going to go crazy either, because it does seem like the moisture level in here throughout the system is quite nice, so I can't complain. Why don't we give them a little bit more grit too? Because really I'm down to only a couple paper type items that we could use to cover up with anymore, right? There's this coffee filter, which traditionally we use as sort of a feeding zone indicator, which I would normally place right on the very tippy top. So you know what I'm going to do? I am going to kind of do something that I appeared to frown on earlier, which is, put two filling-less layers against each other, because I'm out of filling, I mean, I guess, you know what? Maybe we're not. Let's do this. Remember all this stuff that we stacked up here on the edge? It was to a high degree leftover bits of food, so there was worms mixed in with it, there was fragments of bedding, but I think if we just take a lot of the stuff that's out here on the edge and we just give it a quick look through, we're going to find that there's all kinds of stuff in here that can definitely count as food for a lasagna layer. And I think I prefer having it submerged anyway. So bringing it back in and then eventually covering it with something, in my book is a preferred way to do it versus just leaving food items exposed out on the surface of the worm bin. In the past, I'd even kind of used just a top layering of sprinkled leaves just to give my bins a nice natural look, but also as a protective top coating so that there's, no fragments of food just sitting out on the surface. We could do that too if we wanted to. But it feels to me like between the extra coffee filters that have gone in now, that handful of shredded paper we used at the very beginning, as well as in one of those layers with the coffee, the extra cardboard layer, there's a good amount of bedding and carbon-rich stuff going in here already. So I don't think that the top coating of leaves is terribly important. Although aesthetically it would be kind of nice, I must admit. I do have a weakness for, having a bin that has sort of a natural appearance to it. So for that reason, I would often take my my collection of leaves and sprinkle some leaves just across the very tippy top of the bin after everything's been restored, just to kind of give it that forest floor appearance. I know it seems a little cheesy. I don't think I've done that in a while. I haven't really been thinking that way lately. I don't know why. Perhaps I've just been preoccupied with the cool temperatures down here and allowing that to become my sort of focal point of concern lately. Alright, wow, that was kind of cool. We've managed to reconstruct our lasagna layer, and from the look of it, you wouldn't even know it's there. So this thing is just indicating to us where we last fed. And it's a little bit more in line with how my bins usually look. It's not just a layer upon another layer upon a piece of newspaper upon top of a piece of cardboard. Now my lasagna layers actually seem like they've got bits of food and whatnot in between each of them. And I think it's going to create a good stir down in the lasagna layers. I think we're going to get a good turnout. I think we saw good amounts of worms pretty much everywhere we looked. All throughout the food, all in between the layers, enjoying the scene. Perhaps not consuming food quite as quickly as they would be in the summertime, but, you know, I have to take that as, normal. I can't really treat that as an issue because I already know its cause. I know the cause is the cooler temperatures down here, so, I might have to just scale back feedings or extend the period of time in between feedings because I don't want to have food rotting in here. So I wonder what will happen next time we get in here. I wonder if we'll have any signs of the asparagus left. At the rate they're consuming stuff, we might. The melon being such a tasty morsel seems like, seems to have a slim chance of remaining, but who knows? If things are slowing down in here, we might see leftovers of that too. But we'll have to wait until that time to see what happens, right? But until then, I think we're done here. We're going to put this system back up on the shelf, and I got a few things to clean up. But I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.